National Geographic Channel. An aging ship laden with gold and silver founders on a desolate Canadian coastline. Centuries later, underwater explorers search for her valuable cargo and recount the story of a treasure ship's tragedy. Now, on Mysteries of the Deep.
November 1761, the North Atlantic. In the midst of a furious northeast gale, the captain and crew of the treasure ship the Auguste are fighting for their very survival. Aboard the Auguste, a total of 121 souls. They're on their way from Quebec City to France with a cargo of gold and silver. The Auguste is disabled and adrift. Captain John Knowles tries to maneuver the Auguste towards a river mouth and possible shelter. His efforts are futile. The Auguste is driven aground. Today, what's left of the Auguste and her valuable cargo of gold and silver is lying on the bottom of Cape Breton's Aspy Bay in the Canadian province of Nova Scotia. It's an exposed body of water that's subject to the fury of the storm systems known as nor'easters, which regularly pound these shores. Joe Amaral is a veteran of undersea exploration, and he's here with his team to uncover the tragic tale of the Auguste.
They were driven in from a northeast gale. It could have been a hurricane for all we know, but we know that the weather was terrible. If you can imagine 10 to 15 foot seas in here, the ship was being driven from offshore to where we think it wrecked. We know that it ran aground. When you think about a wooden ship in the sea, you think about the force that must have been generated to rip that ship apart. I've come to believe that this wreck is certainly scattered about a lot more than anybody ever imagined. And that's probably due to the conditions of the storm that he was in when it wrecked.
250 years ago, there was no one to call for help. The captain and crew of the Auguste have to fend for themselves. In a desperate attempt at survival, many take to the frigid waters. For most, hypothermia and death are inevitable. "114 people lose their lives. Only 7 men survive. Among them is one of the most remarkable figures of his time, aristocrat, fur-trading entrepreneur, and war hero, Saint Luc de la Corne. His personal journal of this shipwreck disaster is one of the great survival stories of the 18th century. This epic tale has impressed historian Jay Castle.
It's an astonishing story, and Saint Luc knew it. In fact, this is going to be one of the first books to get published in Canada. The wreck of the Auguste was big news at the time. It was an appalling tragedy in an era of many tragedies.
Saint Luc de la Corne is by nature a survivor, accustomed to making the best of what fate throws his way. He's made his personal fortune by venturing into the unexplored interior of Canada and setting up a vast fur trading empire.
Saint Luc is one of the millionaires of Canada. He was stupendously successful at the fur trade. He made an incredible amount of money. At the same time, he was an officer in the Marines. He was a specialist in guerrilla warfare. He got on very well with the native people, spoke 4 or 5 of their languages, and of course fought right alongside them in the guerrilla warfare, ugly small-scale wars that were fought during the 1740s and 50s.
Saint Luc de la Corne earns the nickname General of the Indians. For his outstanding combat record in fighting the British, King Louis XV of France awards him the coveted Cross of St. Louis. But eventually the tide of war turns against the French and Saint Luc de la Corne. September 13th, 1759. British and French forces fight a decisive battle for control of North America on the Plains of Abraham just outside of Quebec City. The French forces are defeated by the British. French military officers like Saint-Luc de la Corne are considered security risks and are to be deported to France. At 50 years of age, he has to give up the fur trading empire that took him years to build up and start from scratch in France. Entire family fortunes, homes, property, and businesses must all be sold and turned into transportable wealth, which, along with personal possessions, are packed for the sea journey to France. French military personnel and their families are forced to leave, some 7,000 people in all. Now, almost 250 years later, remains of these 18th century family fortunes of gold and silver coins are being discovered on the bottom of Aspy Bay. This French silver coin is part of a lost fortune that went down with the ship. This one is dated 1652. Historian Jay Castle and assistant archaeologist Dave Miller are thrilled with the discovery.
These are very rare. There were very few of them circulating in Canada. Very, very few of them have been found. This would definitely have been part of somebody's coin hoard, some treasure that they've gathered together.
Certainly, I enjoy the hunt, the thrill of being in this place to uncover the history that happened here. To me, it's like a time capsule. I mean, we're uncovering something that happened 240 years ago, and it's very exciting. Every day we find something different, something new, something that will continue to tell a story as we go along.
Joe Amaral and his Auguste Expeditions team are determined to bring to life the story of a doomed ship and its tenacious survivors. Team member and surveyor Arnie Carr has spent much of his career locating shipwrecks using a device called a magnetometer.
The cesium vapor magnetometer, it measures the magnetic signature of the Earth, perfect for finding old shipwrecks. It measures mainly ferrous metal. Something like a car, you can see it probably 50 feet away or 100 feet away. Something smaller would have to be much closer. What we're doing is, one way they call it, mowing the lawn, just doing parallel lines close together.
The survey will literally paint a picture of what lies just below the sand and cobbles of the bay. The magnetometer data is plotted to a chart. Arnie and Joe believe it will help in the search for what's left of the Auguste.
Right here and just off, we know that this ship was being pushed in by a northeaster. From LaCorne's journal, we know that he ended up in here in Aspy Bay.
And when he came down, he certainly didn't have much maneuverability.
Right.
So when he committed for what he best could, and it might very well be Dingwall Harbor, and then hit and was driven to the southeast parallel to shore by a secondary current.
Right, you mean after it ran aground and started to break up?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And we know we've got a lot of sub-bottom in here. But certainly, I believe the stern is up here, and that's where we should be headed. That's where we should be concentrating our efforts.
The underwater finds are being backed up by historical evidence that's been found in archives and libraries. Nautical archaeologist Rob Reedy.
This site is unique for a number of reasons. Not only do we have the wreck, we have a very, very detailed list of the passengers who were on board. They're able to be identified by family crests, by names, all types of things. Very unusual that you find it to this degree on any shipwreck.
October 11th, 1761. The Auguste is at Quebec City taking on passengers, deportees destined for France. Among them is Saint-Luc de la Corne. He's with his 2 sons as well as his brother and 2 nephews. Luc de Lacorne's wife and 3 daughters have remained in Montreal to look after what's left of the family business. They may never see their husband and father again. The other deportees are a mix of French officers, merchants, and their families.
These people were being deported from the only homes they had ever known. They were being shipped out of Canada forever. They had been allowed to sell off all their property and convert it into movable wealth, which in this case is coins. The more fortunate of them were able to get things like this, which is a double louis, or some of the smaller denominations of French gold coins. The actual amount of wealth or material in today's terms, it would probably be in the neighborhood of several $million.
The divers continue to scour Aspy Bay and discover important links to the Auguste and her passengers.
That makes it absolutely a signature piece.
When Mysteries of the Deep returns.
October 15th, 1761. The Auguste set sail from Quebec City for what should be a 6-week Atlantic crossing. British Captain John Knowles and his 14-member crew have been charged with taking the Auguste and her 106 passengers to France. The ship is a modest one and doesn't match the status of her wealthy passengers and their valuable cargo. Wooden ships of this era have a lifetime of perhaps 15 years. As she sets sail from Quebec City, the Auguste is now more than 10 years old and is feeling her age. In Aspy Bay, Joe Amaral is hoping their hard work will lead them to the large numbers of gold and silver coins that were aboard the Auguste.
The coins were in chests. Chests or barrels. Certainly the chests and the barrels aren't going to be intact. The worms have probably eaten those up and they've been destroyed for a long time. But the hoops that were around the barrels or the hardware that would have been on the chests, certainly those will still be there.
The relentless waves combined with the grinding rock and sand have made certain that much of the Auguste and her cargo are lost forever.
With a very high energy area, a very dynamic area that is extraordinarily hostile to any kind of organic material. Wood, cloth, any of that is going to be, if it isn't eaten by microbes, it's going to be ground up in this bottom.
The underwater search is a difficult and painstaking process. Many of the artifacts are buried under a deep layer of sand and rock. Joe Amaral and his team use a piece of equipment called a diverter.
Right now I'm going to try and get us into a 3-point more on a big gamma hit, a magnetometer hit that we haven't had a chance to dig on yet. It's probably under 4 or 5 feet of sand, so we're going to try and blow that sand out of there and find out what it is. That's the plan this morning anyway.
Mounted on the back of the dive vessel, the diverter redirects the ship's propeller wash in order to blow away the sand and silt. With a 30-second blow, it can clear an area on the seafloor 3 feet deep and 4 feet in diameter. Diver Chris Lindquist searches for small fragments of the ship's remains. He uses a handheld metal detector, which can penetrate about 18 inches into the seabed.
We do a lot of recon with the metal detectors, looking for any type of, metallic hit, which would potentially give us something from the wreck.
Move that big boat up closer. Once I get back, okay, I'll put the Sister Ann up here on this other anchor, so I can keep a better eye on you too. Sure.
We have a general idea of where some of the major metallic anomalies are. But at the same time, there's some areas that probably have 10 or 15 feet of sand. Other areas just bare clay.
Getting at the Auguste's remains is tough physical work for the divers. Tons of sand and rock are removed by hand. Giant air bladders are used to move the material clear of the dive site. Most of the coins being discovered are found scattered over a wide area of Aspy Bay.
We find small deposits of coins that could represent what was in a person's purse or pocket when they shed their coat or dropped their purse in the surf or where they drowned, and the material just stayed there.
Luke's up. How'd you do?
Pretty good. Whoa, all right. I think this is a bunch of crew.
1690. That's the second one I think we've seen at 1690. I think you've got something of a rarity here. It appears to me that this coin is struck twice. It says 1690, and then there's another 9 after it. And if you look on the other side, it appears that it's struck again. And if that's the case, this is a very, very, very good find. This is a very rare coin.
The story of the Auguste's passengers and crew is slowly coming to life. And it's not just coins that are being discovered.
This is silver dagger hilt guard piece. I believe the rest of the hilt would come up here. The blade would be down in this area.
Okay.
Up here you'd have a small hilt and then the pommel. I believe this may also have a family coat of arms on there. That'll remain to be seen when it gets down to the lab.
Whenever we bring up something like a personal possession, you can't help but wonder, who was the last person to hold this object. These people were taking their dearest possessions with them back home. So you just have to know that this thing very likely was something very dear to the person.
A remarkable piece of silver cutlery bearing a family coat of arms has been found on the bottom of the bay.
Yeah, we'll put it back. Normally bring that on. There you go, buddy.
Okay. Nice find. Wow, that's in great shape.
How'd you like to have that at your dinner table?
Oh, baby. You know it. That's beautiful. Check the crest out on the back. You have to.
Some lions and a stag's head. What do you think?
That's superb. That is in such good condition. That's astonishing. And the coat of arms is very clear. You have 2 lions rampant facing each other with a stag's head in the center, and that makes it Leghorn. So what you got here is the family of Leghorn. That makes it absolutely a signature piece for the Auguste. That's just such a super, super find.
It's a wonderful discovery, providing a direct link to French war hero and Auguste survivor, Saint Luc de Leghorn. The team knows the bay is hiding more secrets, but will they be able to find the missing treasure?
The divers recover the ship's cannons, vital clues to where the wreck's stern and treasure may be.
We're going to keep looking until we find it.
November 6, 1761. It's been 3 weeks since the Auguste left Quebec City. Difficult sailing conditions and poor weather have hampered her progress. By now, she should have been well into the Atlantic and clear of the coast's November gales. The Auguste is a typical freighter of the mid-18th century. She's spent over a decade plying the waters between the Caribbean and Europe, transporting commodities like sugar, coffee, and indigo. The numerous Atlantic crossings have taken a toll on the ship. Evidence of her poor condition is found in Aspy Bay. A lead plate attracts the attention of one of the divers. Historian Jay Castle and assistant archaeologist David Miller recognize what pieces like this mean.
When you see lead sheeting on a wooden ship of the period, it usually means it's used as patching.
Right.
And the amount of this lead that we found suggests that the
it's very patched up.
Patched up.
Yeah.
Was,
that's about what you would expect, because the Auguste is, by this point in time, quite an old ship. The British would have been pressing into service any ship that they could get their hands on to help them transport. They had a lot of people to send back to France. So not too surprising that some of them were going to have to make do with a ship as old and beaten up as the Auguste.
Yeah, I'd say that's...
A battered piece of ship's timber surfaces with diver Luke Ogden.
Their engine just slid it right out.
Wow, that's great. That's great. We're going to have to get this in water here.
There's the islet right there.
This is among several of the pieces that we found to date. We've got another piece that probably was a plank, and we're finding these types of nails that are peeking right through holes that were hand drilled like these. Certainly, you know, this diameter of this hole fits the diameter of the nails that we've been coming up with. Pretty neat when you find a piece of wood that's 240 years old that came off of a vessel that you can't find any major parts of.
It's week 4 of the voyage, and with the weather continuing to deteriorate, the Auguste has only made it as far as the Gulf of St. Lawrence. St. Luc de la Corne's journal entries describe the terrible conditions.
On the 4th day of the month, a most violent northeast wind blew up. The sails were reefed, the helm made fast. Every instant we seemed to see our graves yawning to receive us. For 48 hours without let-up, to all the rigor of a frightful and unending storm.
The severe weather passes, but there's another crisis in store for the exhausted crew and passengers. The ship is almost lost when a cooking fire in the galley sets part of the vessel ablaze. By November 11th, another major storm system is brewing in the North Atlantic and on a collision course with the Auguste. The situation aboard the ship is dire. Many of the provisions have been burned or spoiled. With torn sails, broken masts, and a fire-damaged hull, the crew can barely control the ship.
What efforts we could make to keep offshore were weak and ineffective. We beat off the wind and got away from a shore on which we would certainly have perished.
The Auguste is now at the mercy of another vicious Atlantic gale. They've been battling eastward for almost a month, but a cruel shift in wind pushes the Auguste back towards land and towards danger. St. Luc de la Corne recalls the sense of dread felt by all aboard the ship.
Our distress can well be imagined. We were uncertain of our whereabouts and without food. The crew were in the depths of despair. We could no longer see any hope of saving ourselves.
November 15th, 1761, 31 days into the sea journey. The situation aboard the Auguste is desperate. Powerless in the face of the crushing nor'easter, the Auguste is driven aground. Over the next few hours, the ship breaks apart in the pounding surf. St. Luc de la Corne is one of a handful of survivors that makes it ashore.
It would be difficult to do justice to the horror of my situation. The cries of those who remained on the vessel, the futile efforts of those who, hoping to save their lives, threw themselves into the sea. The cold and drenching rain, the certainty that I had lost my children. The ship went to pieces on shore, and we beheld the distressing spectacle of lifeless bodies washed ashore. 114 in all. Our dismay was so heavy that we scarcely spoke.
The artifacts being discovered in Aspy Bay are a journey back in time for Jay Castle and David Miller.
I find this one really fascinating. This is one of my favorites right here.
It's a crucifix.
Crucifix, probably part of a rosary bead. You can see the image of Christ on the front here and the writing inscriptions on the back.
Oh, yes.
Very easily, so somebody could have been praying their rosary beads as the ship went down.
The last thing they held before Yeah, look at that. Yes, that's actually very clear, very clear. It's quite a poignant item.
The storm that destroyed the Auguste played a large role in how she came to be scattered throughout the bay.
As they came in and were trying to make the inlet, she got into shallower and shallower water, began to beat her keel on the bottom, suffering structural damage, frames breaking. The ship basically began to disintegrate.
If you're looking over my shoulder, these buoys are all part of the shipwreck. If you keep looking further to the north and the east, that'll give you some idea of the extent of how large the area is that the ship wrecked over.
But after weeks of diving, only small deposits of coins have been found. The Auguste's tantalizing cargo of treasure remains elusive.
What we have here is a scatter pile where the northeast wind drove it down to this area of the Aspy Bay, and this is where it ended up.
By moving his search further to the north, Joe is convinced he will locate the ship's cargo of gold and silver, the personal wealth of men like St. Luc de la Corne.
I believe the stern section broke off the ship when it wrecked, and it's probably still in the same area that it wrecked in.
In his journal, St. Luc de la Corne writes that he had rented the ship's stateroom, which was located in the stern of the ship. The largest and most significant finds that have so far been discovered are a number of the ship's cannons. And it's these weapons that could provide a vital clue in locating the stern. The Auguste was equipped with two types of cannons: deck cannons for engaging the enemy, and obsolete inoperative cannons that were used for ballast. According to Joe, as the Auguste broke up, the deck cannons and the ballast cannons would have ended up in very different places. After marking their underwater locations, the cannons are winched up to the surface for closer inspection.
Look at this, there's the touch hole. I don't wonder if that was pinned. Some of the stories were that they pinned these deck guns before they let this ship leave.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see if that's plugged. That confirms my theory that if this is the deck gun, if this was a deck gun, then certainly the guns that they had for ballast aren't in this particular area, because we've only found 8 or 9 guns, which leads me to believe that the main portion of this vessel is still to the northeast.
Okay, right.
And we're going to keep looking until we find it.
The gun itself was pretty well intact. The trunnions are nice too. This concretion probably fall right off.
And you can see the touch hole quite clearly at the back.
Yes, yeah, very nice. Very, very
So
nice.
definitely a nice gun.
We're at the point where we feel like we have a good idea where there's going to be a large collection of material. And it's probably in a very finite spot, so it's a lot of looking around, just hoping. Every next foot that you cover of the bottom, you just keep hoping that that's going to be the spot. And it may be, it may not be. The expectation of finding the really large collection of material that we're pretty sure is on this ship is very exciting.
On the morning of November the 16th, 1761, there are only 7 survivors on the shore of Aspy Bay. St. Luc de la Corne has lost his 2 sons, his brother, and his 2 nephews. St. Luc de la Corne and the others know that in order to survive, they must find food and shelter.
And then you think about what it must have been like for him to have to bury the 114 souls that washed up on this beach the next day. I think it takes a great deal of courage and determination of survival to go through that ordeal and then march out of here.
For St. Luc de la Corne, the awful ordeal of the shipwreck is only the beginning. Now he must find his way home in the dead of the Canadian winter. It's the middle of November 1761. The 7 survivors find themselves marooned on a desolate shore. Along with St. Luc de la Corne and Captain Knowles, there are 3 soldiers and 2 domestic servants who survived the sinking of the Auguste. For this desperate group, there's no chance of rescue. They are 100 miles away from the closest European settlement, and with a cold Canadian winter about to set in, their chances of survival are slim.
Well, you can just imagine the state these men would have been in. They've just finished burying all these people that they knew, many of them their loved ones or close friends and associates. It's cold, it's wet, they're in the middle of nowhere. In fact, they don't even really know where they are. They have no map, no compass. In his journal, St. Luc tells us he and the survivors go looking for food, whatever they could carry, whatever they could find. And he thought perhaps they might have a week's supply.
St. Luc de la Corne knows their only hope is to strike out for civilization. Even today, much of Cape Breton is a sparsely populated, rugged landscape open to the elements. In the 1760s, what few settlements exist are tiny and widely dispersed.
There are only a few small settlements, and there's one major town, the fortress Louisbourg, which has been captured by the British in the last war. So as far as St. Luc is concerned, we're now in enemy territory, and he knows that if he shows up in town, the British are probably going to put him on a ship and send him back to France, whereas in fact, he would rather be headed in the other direction, returning to Canada.
A seasoned explorer who's used to living off the land, St. Luc de la Corne takes responsibility for the small group of survivors. The 7 men make their way south.
For several decades, St. Luc has been active in the fur trade. And when he isn't working in the fur trade, he's been serving with the French army in Canada. He's been on many military expeditions on all the frontiers in the wars between the French and the British. So he's learned from his fellow officers, from the fur traders, and principally from the Indians, all the skills necessary to travel along the rivers, to travel across rugged terrain. He's learned what you must do to stay alive in an inhospitable environment.
St. Luc de la Corne describes the terrible conditions in his journal.
We traveled over sheer cliffs whose hideous aspect dismayed us, through forests whose denseness frightened us, over rivers whose swiftness hindered our march, over mountains so difficult to climb that we lost all heart.
By November 25th, after 9 days of trekking, 2 of the men are too sick and exhausted to continue. St. Luc de la Corne makes the difficult decision to leave the men behind and push on, but he promises to send help. After walking for almost 3 weeks, the 5 survivors are enduring hunger and illness. They stumble to the edge of St. Anne's Bay and a large channel. They have no way to cross. Captain Knowles decides he too can no longer go on. He's suffering from a high fever and festering sores on his legs. 3 of the others are almost as sick.
In such miserable circumstances, the dearth of provisions filled up the measure of our misfortunes. We sometimes found some seaweed. These quieted the pangs of hunger, but left us weakened.
It looks as if they too will not survive the shipwreck that has taken the lives of 114 friends and colleagues. Just when all seems lost, 2 Mi'kmaq hunters come upon the desperate group.
I asked how far we were from Louisbourg. The Indians told me that we were within 30 leagues of the place.
The survivors make it across the channel and head south to a small Acadian settlement called St. Pierre. The Indians then return to rescue the 2 men who were left behind earlier in the trek. For the first time in weeks, the survivors are warm and well fed. They prepare for the last leg of their journey, the 60 miles to the British-held Fort Louisbourg. But here, St. Luc de la Corne makes a momentous decision and decides to leave the other survivors.
In his journal, St. Luc simply tells us, at this point, he has decided he is not going to Louisbourg. He's going to turn in the opposite direction and head for Quebec. He has decided that he will go, whatever the risks may be, back to the land of his people, his family, his friends, his business.
December 11th, 1761. St. Luc de la Corne gambles his future on making it to Quebec City and eventually back to his family in Montreal. In a letter to be delivered to the Louisbourg governor by Captain Knowles, St. Luc de la Corne announces he will take the risk and head home to Quebec.
I explained to him I would give every effort and employ every means to get back to my homeland.
Bidding the other survivors farewell, St. Luc de la Corne recruits the servant Pierre along with 2 Acadian guides and heads west into the frozen wilderness. Their ultimate destination of Montreal is still hundreds of miles away. Back in Aspy Bay, the search for what's left of the Auguste continues. Small objects keep turning up, but a significant discovery remains elusive.
He's all right. Hey, Joe. I've got a target for you.
Hey, Paul? Yes. Can you rig up another buoy to drop? They've got a major hit inside. This is our new hit, the sub-bottom hit from the mag survey. I'm pretty happy. I'm waiting, pretty anxious to find out what this mag hit is, and then I'm pretty excited about what we're going to find next. I'm pretty positive that we're in the right area, and it's all going to happen, hopefully today.
A series of promising finds comes to light. It's only after they're brought ashore and cleaned up that their significance is recognized.
This spoon is really special for me. As far as I can tell, the coat of arms on it is that of the family of Gauthier de la Vérendrye. To find such an object on the Auguste is a rather poignant indication of the fact that the family believed they were indeed leaving Canada, probably for good.
The spoon's owner appears on the Auguste's passenger list. Louis Joseph La Vérendrye was a legendary explorer and mapmaker. In the mid-1700s, he made his name by exploring as far west as the Rocky Mountains. La Vérendrye is not among the survivors. Everyday personal objects that were once worn by the passengers and crew of the Auguste are also turning up.
So this would have been worn on their shoes, and one can imagine this being worn by somebody at the time the ship was going down, and it certainly brings us about as close as we can get this many years later to the passengers who were on the ship.
For Joe Amaral, this season's search for the remains of the Auguste is nearing an end.
I'm trying to tell the whole story, and I think that the part that's missing and that I haven't been able to tell yet is exactly what transpired here on this beach. The large loss of life, the fear, the panic that must have been in their minds when they knew their fate was sealed as this ship was being driven ashore.
St. Luc de la Corne's epic journey is far from over. He's still hundreds of miles away from home. December 18th, 1761. Dense forests, frozen lakes, and rivers all stand between St. Luc de la Corne and his home and family in Montreal. Again, his experience as a frontiersman is paying off. The servant Pierre is unable to continue. The snow and cold are too much. St. Luc de la Corne presses on. By the middle of January 1762, St. Luc de la Corne has made it as far as Fort Cumberland in present-day New Brunswick. Resupplied and rested, St. Luc de la Corne once again sets off on his difficult overland journey through the bitter cold of a Canadian winter. February 24th, 1762. After a 3.5-month journey and close to 800 miles through the wilderness, St. Luc de la Corne returns home to his wife and daughters in Montreal.
The hard experience of the shipwreck itself was almost forgotten in the further difficulties I encountered in getting back to my homeland. I declare that the more I go over in my mind the circumstances of my shipwreck and of my safe delivery, the more I am amazed.
British High Command had been eager to see the back of Captain St. Luc de la Corne, so you can imagine their consternation when he shows up in the city in the middle of winter. They were, in fact, most impressed by his story of the wreck of the Auguste and the enormous journey that he had made in order to get back to town. In the end, General Gage says, the man is to be pitied. And so, rather than being sent back to France, Saint-Luc ends up being one of the people who stays in Canada.
In spite of the devastating loss of his 2 sons, his brother and 2 nephews, St. Luc de la Corne perseveres. Soon he's once again a very wealthy and influential resident of Montreal. Politically astute, he's appointed to the first Legislative Council of Quebec in 1775.
Start thinking about what really happened here and how tragic it was. I think about the people that lost their lives here, and I think about what La Corne said in his diary, how we spent the first day of the survival of the wreckage burying his friends, his family, his brother, his sons. I think about all those things, and I think that's what makes it important for me to continue on trying to find as much as I can, and not only on the site, but about the site, about the people that were involved. It's important for me to understand what their life was like before they lost their life, so I can tell that story or be part of that story and accurately tell it the way it was. That's very important to me.
For Joe Amaral and the Auguste Expeditions team, it's the end of another dive season. Finding the elusive stern of the ship and potential treasure remains out of reach. But little by little, the extraordinary story of the Auguste and survivors like St. Luc de la Corne are being brought to the surface of Aspy Bay.